Some viewers may find this content disturbing. Viewer discretion is advised.
Jamie King from Small Town Monsters. Yes, this is absolutely legendary to see you stop in to the Fox Den tonight for another episode of Midnight Lycanthropy. Yet, please, I have been sleeping for so long and I feel like dust. I must replenish lost nutrients. Much, much better. A tad messier than preferred, yet I will have to just clean that up later. Without further ado, it is time for Jamie King and myself to take a walk into the darkness.
My creatures of the night, yes, once again, it is time for Midnight Lycanthropy here on Starfox Radio. Again, we have a legendary host and guest tonight, Jamie King, who does a ton of his own research and is also associated with Small Town Monsters. How you doing tonight, my friend? Long time no talk.
Yes, I'm very good. Thank you for having me on again.
It is great to get you back and definitely try to figure out what the heck's going on. What's new your way?
Well, my wife and I and a group of other people went up to the Allegheny National Forest. So it's the old growth forest in Pennsylvania. And we've been researching up there for several years. So I've been basically going through hours and hours of recordings that we do. So I'm super interested on the Bigfoot level with recordings, but I kind of wanted to ask you tonight about Dogman vocalizations and those type of things, because we've had things on our recorders that have had a dog type quality, but I don't know much about the Dogman vocalizations that are out there.
That is an excellent question, and actually, that's really cool as well that you and your wife are trudging around out there again, bringing some nice evidence to the topic that we are all trying to figure out. So much kudos there, and that's a really interesting topic to discuss. So I would definitely love to answer some of those questions, and I will give you the stage first. Handle this how you'd like, my friend.
I mean, for me, there's a curiosity level because like I'm in this Dogman world, cryptid world in kind of a different way than most people because I'm not actively out there looking for Dogman, and I'm not sure that too many people are actually out there looking for Dogman. But on occasions, we've had recordings of things that didn't sound quite right. You know, like the animals that we've known. In the Bigfoot world, they have what's called the Sierra Sounds. They have the Ohio Howl. Those are two of the main recordings and vocalizations that people get. We've recorded the Ohio Howl in Pennsylvania and Ohio. And, you know, like for me, it's just sometimes when you're out and you hear like these vocalizations and they sound like they have a dog like quality. I'm curious from you because you're very well versed in all of this. If Dogman makes like wolf-like sounds, coyote-like sounds, or did they make kind of like human type noises? Because I would imagine that they would have like sort of a guttural thing, almost like Sasquatch.
Thanks for the very kind words. First off, I appreciate that. Thank you, man. And right back at you, kudos, because I feel like you're very educated in the aspects of how you approach your research too. And to answer that question, well, that is definitely a multifaceted answer for sure. And in regards of that, I think, like I've touched base before, a lot of people tend to hear the term dogman and just automatically think we're dealing with a canine. And as stated before, a lot of times if people see something and they're not specialized in knowing what it is they're witnessing, a yellow baboon looks extremely canine like pointed ears, large mane, snout, massive werewolf like teeth. They act all insanely crazy, hands, quadrupedal, bipedal, make strange barking slash like howling sounds. And then you have hyenas again that aren't canine related whatsoever. They're related to mongoose and civets, and they make strange whooping sounds, laughing sounds, again barking-ish like canine sounds, but they have no relation to canines whatsoever. And then classified canines that people do know, such as foxes, coyotes, wolves, jackals. There's a whole ton more. Yeah, any dog, even a domesticated dog, can make a sound every once in a while that could be strange, but especially foxes when they laugh. And like I said, coyotes. I remember when I was a child, we were out in this spot in the woods called the Scary Spot, where yeah, it was actually pretty scary, but it was just in the middle of the forest, and you had to drive through someone's like old cow field and whatever. So in the middle of the night, we got out. It was pitch black, and we're pretty sure it was coyotes. I mean, or it was a foxes or something. But either way, more or the less, coyotes and foxes make strange, crazy noises because those coyotes or foxes were making some creepy noises. But it was nothing paranormal based because we have a ton of foxes and coyotes around here. Up in northern Maine, they've started to introduce wolves back into that. But definitely at this point in time in this area, it was 100% coyotes or foxes, and most likely has to be coyotes because I don't think foxes travel in that larger packs. And when you listen to coyotes again, they make some crazy sounds. Where I live now in the forest, man, in the backyard ish area, if you go like way down past these power lines, the coyotes down there, you can hear them in the summertime too. And again, to someone that hasn't ever heard that sound, that could be disturbing. But I think the big thing people should definitely understand is when you deal with something that's intelligent, as you just stated, like say a Sasquatch or a baboon or any sort of primate or crows, animals can mimic things. You know, that term bird brain, well, that used to quote unquote be a diss, but in actuality, birds are super smart. As I just stated, crows can do all kinds of insane things. Parrots can mimic voices and learn to speak. So, yes, something could try to take a sound that is heard and put a spin on it and then not have it come out as it should come out and then sound even more creepy. And I have heard things about that with the Sasquatch and also the Dogman mimicking sounds. But like I stated, so if we are dealing with some of these reports as being a gray baboon or a relative of the Dinopithecus, they would be able to mimic sounds like that. And in general, when they make sounds like that, I actually, in a future video I'm working on, I'm going to have some clips of that and I'll send it to you later on. But like I said, yellow baboons make the most insane barking kind of wow, wow. And it doesn't even sound really apish or doggish. It's creepy as heck. So when it comes to vocalizations, there's definitely a large range because we've had some sent to us where it sounds maybe like a moaning type person, but then it doesn't sound like a person. And it could be something or someone mimicking what they thought would be maybe a wounded person or something because they've heard that before. Say, maybe, I don't know if a Sasquatch or a Dogman is unfortunately disposed of a bunch of people. I assume as people are fading away, there's moaning and pain. I mean, unfortunately seen when people have been attacked by bears, like the gentleman in Alaska, him and his girlfriend on the footage, you don't just is moaning and help, or you see what I'm saying? So maybe if this thing is, or this animal, any animal has been exposed to that enough. I mean, I don't know if anyone's ever tried this, and I really hope not, but maybe the Russians back in World War II or the Germans in World War II did. But imagine putting a parrot by someone that's wounded, right? Or all the time. Wouldn't that parrot pick up on how they're speaking? And then you'd walk in the room. I mean, if they're saying your name or hello or cracker, etc., more or less what I'm trying to say is there are known animals that can mimic things. So if something has been exposed to that, like I said, Dogman or Bigfoot, I wonder if that creepy human sound that people heard was one of them trying to mimic that to get people to come out and help. And then, okay, so you can snag somebody else. But then, as I stated, we've had a lot of other vocalizations submitted that sound apish, wolfish, kind of just strange. Something like maybe a baboon or a hyena could be making.
Right. You make me think about Zanesville, Ohio, that had this animal park where these animals escaped. And I think it took them, I don't know if they actually got all of the animals back in, but like there's animals that could be wandering around the woods that we're really unfamiliar with because they're not native to North America or they're not native to Ohio or Pennsylvania in general.
Yes, and I'm so glad you brought that up because again, and preach, my friend, because it's something I tell people and try to preach myself is animals are super adaptive. It's no different than the Burmese python right now in the Everglades that
Right.
is battling with the alligators down there. Animals can adapt, okay? So, yes, you and I, if someone wants to say, well, you guys aren't scientists or biologists, okay, correct. But it's kind of common sense to understand that that's how animals adapt. It's no different than the first version of tigers that went to Siberia or the snow monkeys. They didn't start there. It was a tropical version that went there and adapted, okay? So, in general, animals can adapt. So, if we take a hyena, right, because Africa does get cold at night, and now let's take a hyena from Africa, right? Let's put it over in Europe, okay? Let's put it over in California. Let's put it up in some areas where it's not drastically cold at large points of the season, but also if they have caves and other members that can huddle up, and as long as they're getting food sources. So now, if you're taking something like that, or a baboon also, out of an area where, let's be real, is Africa not pretty much rigged against you? Like I said, in regards of everything's trying to eat you there. I mean, it doesn't matter whether
Right.
the lion, the crocodile, the baboon, man, every predator eats everything, dude. Okay. So if you're like a game animal that's just trying to eat grass, man, you're definitely not in a really good spot. Okay. So now, if you take these dominant predators and put them in an area, as stated, like we have them in a controlled zoo or something, and they do escape, okay, what makes somebody not think they wouldn't be able to survive? So, if a group of baboons escapes and they're meant to be in India and Africa and places like that, and now they're running through California, they don't really have a known predator. They don't really have any issues. I mean, now there's plenty of food sources, there's people's pets to steal, there's animals in general, there's water sources. And same thing with hyenas, which is kind of one of the theories people speak about with the Beast of Gévaudan in France. Maybe some royalty members had brought back animals from Africa, exotic animals, and because the reports were it looked like a striped hyena, but the problem is they're not pack oriented and they're scavengers. Yet spotted hyenas are pack oriented and actually hunt. And the gentleman that it, even though the witnesses said it looked like a striped hyena, he said, well, he spotted hyena. So then that brings into question, as I stated, were they brought there by us, or have they been there in actuality, just in general, naturally, kind of like the cave in Saudi Arabia that was found?
Right. So then the other thing I would think of is like if there was an animal that was not indigenous to North America, like a zoologist could look at like shelters and things like in the Bigfoot community, they look at like the Olympic projects looking into these nests that they found on the Olympic Peninsula. So I'm curious if an animal that would be considered like a dog man, if you narrowed it down to like whether it being like a dog or a canine or like a baboon, is anyone finding any kind of like shelters and things that they could live in, like caves and stuff? Like I know that canines pretty much burrow and go underground.
Great question and great observation. And yes, we found some pretty strange dens. And as you stated, coyotes love doing that. So do foxes. And a lot of people don't know hyenas make dens and burrows that go down a minimum of 7 feet. And now, so if they're able to burrow back and forth, and mongoose and civets, which are the hyenas' relatives, love using tunnels and passageways. And also, people have seen strange burrows into the side of riverbanks and such. You have all that now. And then also with the cave systems that are clanking around, you have easy transportation, and that's animals in general will use cave systems just to get around. And we know really nothing about cave systems, and a ton of people are going missing in those areas.
I think the cave systems in America are really, really, they're there and they're just like not really super explored. And I think a lot of times, like this is a weird thing to say, but this past weekend I did a lecture in Southern Pennsylvania, and we were talking about we did our lecture on a micro study and how to start a micro study with recordings and looking for what to look for, like for shelters and stuff. And it kept coming across this area of water, so these reservoirs in Pennsylvania, that all of these Bigfoot sightings were happening. And I was curious, like in the 1960s, they started using like these water management. So they were creating these dams and these reservoirs. And it's strange to say, but a lot of the Bigfoot sightings and actually Dogman sightings occurred near these reservoirs.
Great observation. And to be real, I mean, when humans interject like that, when we make dams and such, it's known to affect fish species that were unable to get back to their spawning points and etc. So we know it does affect the environment. And now let's be real again, if bears and things understand that and will go to areas where fish are clogged up and we're unable to get to where they were supposed to be, even maybe if it's naturally, and pluck off the salmon, then why would something like a potentially lost ancestor to humans or a primate or anything of intellect, why would it not just go snag that stuff? It's no different than, like our environmentalist was saying recently, it was found that whatever this animal, it matched the dire wolf's tooth perfectly. Super interesting. But also, she used to raise sheep, and sheep are super not smart, nor are goats, unfortunately, and they're easy pickings. Okay, so again, if predators like wolves and cougars and bears realize, hey, I can just go to this person's farm and let's just like grocery shopping. So now you have these reservoirs that are set up. You have a lot of fish and animal sources. You have water. You have large areas that are protected for the most part. Sure, anything that's a predator wants to eat or wants to conceal itself, that's prime time home space right there.
I mean, yeah, the interesting observation. Yeah. So, I mean, are people in the Dogman community, are they looking at areas that have had large amounts of Dogman sightings and putting out recorders and looking for shelters like a micro study like we're doing here?
Good question again. And we definitely have different variants and levels as to how people approach things. I know people such as our leader, Jody Cogno, he has tried to set up game cams. And thing is with a game cam, they're just tough in general, etc. Even just to really catch a ton of wildlife. I mean, sometimes you do, but I've seen other people just show examples of how they might have caught like a squirrel or something, but they showed how it just was nothing for quite a long time. So when it comes to that, it's tough with images, and I've almost got to the point of when it comes to images, I don't even really use that as evidence, or if people want to say ammunition for the battle. I don't use those really because I feel like there isn't really, the scientific world is never going to take an image as, hey, this is it, unless it's pretty, I hate to use this term, idiot proof and pretty clean cut. And almost every quote unquote cryptid image of something, well, is pretty skeptical when you look at
I
it.
mean, even the Patterson Gimlin is still scrutinized to this day.
You are correct. What's great about that, though, is with it being blown up now and remastered, honestly, anyone that knows anything about anatomy and what was able to be accessed at that point in time, even to create, say, a costume, and how hard it would have been to find a being that large to move like that, let's be real, that's pretty much been proven to be real footage. So, again, if anyone knows anything about anatomy, go ahead, and I highly suggest go out and check that out for yourself. But yeah, if something is living like that and moving, it's so hard with just the thing with Bigfoot, though, is your groups have some pretty interesting, compelling footage, like the one of the Freeman footage, which honestly, in my opinion, is just as good as the Patty, where it looks super kind of ape-like the way its head moves, where he's out, and he was a forest ranger. I don't know the exact location. Like I said, I dive into the Dogman stuff. I'm aware of this.
I tend to believe the Freeman footage for sure.
Yes, and then there's another one where it's in an area, it might have been the skunk ape, okay, in an area where there's a ton of alligators and poisonous spiders and snakes. And if this man or a woman was in this costume, they would have been putting their lives in extreme danger. And also, it was strange how quickly they were able to make their way through that swampy type area. And I feel like those three right there really bring some pretty good quality evidence to the topic that you're trying to present. Whereas when it comes to the dog man, every video has always been debunked, whether it's the Gable film or someone that just tried to send us something from Bladenboro, North Carolina, of what looked like maybe an 80-year-old granny in a suit trying to run off into the forest. Yes. So the problem is with that, like I said, I don't really have anything that I view as totally excellent. I have your footprints, which are excellent, but again, that's not a picture of quote unquote a dog man. I have the coyotes that were massacred, which I have hair samples, other unknown footprints. Those all are great, but meaning, as you were saying, pictures of Sasquatch, no, like I don't really have anything that I feel that is completely out of this world with a dog man that the scientific community is going to look at and be like, wow, that's
So what about
crazy.
like, okay, so like I'm familiar with Ohio researchers, and like Jody Cook, I've met him on a few occasions, but I'm curious, like when he found these structures that were in Ohio that were these, how they labeled grassman, because these structures were like almost like a teepee structure like you find in the Bigfoot community, but they were made of grass. So they labeled Bigfoot grassman. Does Bigfoot or does a Dogman have anything that's like specifically labeled to that species of cryptid?
Great question. And again, good observation. And yeah, Jody's the man for sure. So when it comes to mostly the dogman type areas and dens, they seem to like to be in, like I said, burrows that might, it's almost, think of the mechanics of a trapdoor spider, right? What's it do? It kind of conceals the top of its burrow. So the approaching victim thinks it's normal ground and then it gets snagged. Well, there's some areas where they've been found where foliage has been pulled over and it looks like something could just kind of be peeping out, watching you more or less. And then, yeah, it looks like a
So
den
it's
or
like a
a
trap
burrow.
door. So that's associated with the Dogman.
That's one of the ones that's pretty interesting. Yes, but there also seem to like to be in areas that are easily accessible, like old mine shafts, old sawmills, old buildings,
That's a
old.
good jumping off point for somebody that is trying to start like a micro study. They should look into like old maps and look at mines to see where there's different mines. Look into
Yes.
old reports. Look into reports of Dogman to see if there's locations where people have had encounters that are close to those type of things, and geography like ley lines and stuff like that too.
Yes, and again, excellent observation, and that's really something I encourage people to do. And what I'm trying to do is, yes, because if we're able to look at those aspects and see that, it brings some pretty interesting questions to, well, wait a second, if it's burrow that we know of for a hyena. The problem is people don't realize that it stays in generation after generation with hyenas, okay? And if they're in a pack that is like a 50, 100 plus, it's going to stay within them. Okay, so unless another pack of hyenas pushes them out or another predator, which the other predator is not going to, so it'd have to be more hyenas, they would just
So that
overtake
would
the
be,
dead.
like you're talking about that's a question that comes to mind immediately is in the, like in the Dogman community, did they have encounters, or have there been encounters where there's multiple dogmen? If they do run in packs, I would imagine that they're not alone, like solo, or they can probably be solo.
Very interesting question and great question as well. Yeah, there's definitely been some instances where people have reported multiple of them and say if they saw 4 or 5 of them. And again, like I stated, baboons are super creepy looking and they look like raging werewolf like canines. Okay, and now they're pushing themselves up easily onto 2 legs. Why not? Of course, if it's a primate, it can jump all around, it can be seen up in the trees like people
Yeah, I mean,
see.
even primates, they live in type of communities, and
Yes.
they have like a pecking order within that.
Yes. So that's what I'm trying to say to people is when they see 4 or 5 of those, yeah, of course those baboons would stay together if they were A, here naturally and they made their way up, or B, as you said, they're relatives or they've escaped from, a place, etc. So it's very interesting that you state that. And we also know, quote unquote, canines do, but like I'm trying to stress, it doesn't have to, just because someone says canine, it looked like a canine doesn't mean it has to be that, because I've said it 100 times with the hyenas, etc. So again, hyenas are pack oriented too. Yes, and I kind of actually would like to ask your opinion real quick on this because, as stated, I'm not necessarily a specialist when it comes to anything in paranormal based because that's not what I delve into. But I've come up with, I don't even know, maybe someone else has stated this before, but I was thinking and thinking, okay. So Ryan Tremblay, a good friend of mine, he dives into like the Wendigo and things along the lines of that. And he really educated me a lot and just about the Navajo culture, and our tracker, Noxium, is also part of an indigenous culture where he's educated me a ton, and we have other members that are indigenous based, so super cool. But more or less what I'm trying to get at is that they've all pretty much told me the same thing, that a lot of them don't even like to talk about it because it's taboo to their cultures. But the skinwalker, more or less, if you look at like the terminologies, it means he or she on all fours or being on all fours. So you are basically overtaking the animal that you've pelted and you have its power and yours, but you're not some raging crazy werewolf or etc. You're literally just taking over the pelt of that beast, but with your intellect of a person. Okay, so now say if someone did get the pelt of a wolf, correct, or delve into the skinwalker, wolves aren't really supposed to just be up on their legs all the time. So when people have heard these popping sometimes, what if it's the skinwalker, well knowing that it's fine and it's obviously forcing itself up like that, and the popping is because it's forcing its joints out of place, but it doesn't hurt it because it's a magical type witch, etc. Because when I used to have to get my back adjusted all the time, yes, when things pop out of place or in place, your bones make noises. And when they're going out of place in a bad way or in place in a good way, there's pop, pop, pop. It's only been in a few cases where people have reported hearing that. And it really makes me think that it actually might be potentially a skinwalker, which is why they heard that popping. Whereas other dogman things, if it's the baboon or the hyena, they have no problem being like that. I mean, a hyena can push itself up on 2 legs, a bear can. There's no popping like that. But if it's like pushing itself up to walk towards you physically, like erect, there's like a huge, dogs aren't really meant to do that.
I mean, I'm glad you asked that question because, like, my wife and I are both on the woo aspect of Sasquatch, and we were both paranormal researchers at Mansfield Prison and Haunted Hillview Manor. So I understand the whole aspect of the whole paranormal side of it. And, like for my wife and I, we try to establish a biological creature first, then we're
Yes.
looking at the spiritual side of it. In the paranormal world, there's an intelligence that's outside of what we are our known senses. So there's an intelligence, and we try to establish that with the paranormal. So when we're in the forest, we will sometimes pull out a recorder. We have this recorder that we use that's like highly coveted. In the paranormal world, it's almost $3,000 if you want to buy a used one, and it records an
Ooh.
infrasound. So what you're saying is, like, if something were coming in through a vortex or something, it could make these popping noises, like, because it's not a natural joint movement.
Yeah, more or less.
A lot of times in the paranormal world, like, we've done investigations where there were Bigfoot reports, and we've had this recorder, and we've heard things like this static noise that comes through the recorder, almost like something's coming through. And a lot of people say that in order for them to come through into our realm of existence, they have this higher energetic force that comes through. So, like, it's always good to look at it in a biological way, but it's also responsible to look at it in the paranormal way too. So I think that's very plausible that that could happen, that you could hear this cracking and popping of joints that maybe not natural for an animal. And if you capture that on a recorder, that's really cool. And if a witness tells you that that's what they heard, then that's something that should be noted. And even the BFRO, which is Bigfoot Field Research Organization, they a long time ago didn't take reports that were outside of the normal, which is woo, wildly outside the ordinary.
Hmm.
And now they're looking into that stuff. So they're, like when you have a trail that goes on a dead end with like the physical evidence that you might get
Yes.
from a biological creature, then you have to start looking at that other side of it, which is the paranormal.
100%, my friend, preach. And if you don't, not you, but just anyone in general, then you're not doing what you should be as a journalist, such as myself, a researcher, such as yourself, whatever people would like to deem or term us or term themselves. It's what, yeah, 100% needs to be done because that's how anything's solved is figuring out, okay, A, B, C. Well, this doesn't make sense. This kind of makes sense. And that's what I really try to do. I feel comfortable being able to speak to people about, as I stated to you earlier in this episode, about the animals that fall into the categories of that do still exist and also previously existed. And I feel confident showing around tracks that you have some of the other ones that we have that don't look like bear, but they are not. Like, we don't know if they're fully hyena. There's strange, strange stuff. And people, yeah, should just really take a second and realize that there is a scientific aspect to this and that there isn't just hearsay. And I feel like a lot of people take it as a grain of salt and they don't really get a second to understand what is totally happening. And there's a quality mixture of physical stuff, as I stated, where people see them eating, drinking water.
It's super important too to listen to what all the indigenous tribes say. So like when they talk about Skinwalker, and it's basically oral history, but it's still known in their communities and it's still shared to this day. I think it's viable to always look into that and pay attention to what they have to say, because I think that the indigenous people know more than we do now with
Oh yeah,
all of it.
100%. And like I was saying before, before I let you get back to what you're doing, because I know you're a busy guy, is that yeah, when something's physical, no matter what, it's able to be destroyed, whether it's a woolly mammoth or etc. Okay, any weapon works on something that's physical. Body armor doesn't matter. A car, it works on that. Okay, but yeah, when you come to the paranormal stuff, like you were saying a little bit more, that's when it does need to be looked at like that and does need to, have a second thought and be like, well, wait a second, okay, because as far as I know, Unless someone is a Ghostbuster from like the '80s movie I used to love, right? You can't fight
Right.
ghosts with any sort of modern weapons, correct? So,
Right.
as far as I know, if a ghost did manifest in front of you, whether you had a badass specked out military weapon, it's just going to go through it, correct? Whereas if something's physical in front of you, whether it's a bear or not, you're going to be able to light it up.
I mean, it's all a challenge. The whole cryptozoological community, it's all a challenge, and it's all about putting puzzle pieces together. So the mistakes that the Bigfoot community made was that they only looked at the physical evidence and they didn't look at this spiritual aspect, which is
Yes,
the
yes,
indigenous
like the
people.
indigenous cultures, like we were saying, 100%,
So
man.
I really, really hope that the Dogman community really looks into all of it responsibly and just, kind of weeds out what is and what isn't.
Which is what I'm trying to do. And no, I appreciate that because it is super important to listen to people that actually were here long before any of my ancestors came over here and people that actually spent time out in the forest. Whereas, I like to consider myself intellectual, but I didn't spend my whole life out in the forest like our tracker did, which is why, as on a funny note, like he has a hard time logging into social media. I have to help him with that stuff, but he can tell
Yeah.
you all kinds of cool things about animals, where they're going, more or less because that's where he spent his existence. So, as you just stated, what I'm trying to say is that people that are out in areas and have spent their lives in the wilderness would know much more about certain aspects than you or I, or people that are more congregated into one area, because humans like to be together. So, even though there's so many of us still, there's still a ton of opened up area, especially in the United States, where, yeah, we're all grouped together in these cities and stuff, but then there's still a ton of wilderness.
Yeah.
Definitely some interesting stuff. But all right, man. Well, thank you so much for giving me some more of your time. I appreciate it. Let me know in the future again when you do get some more time. It would definitely be cool to get you on maybe once a month or so, but if not, at least once every couple months. Yeah, I know you're a busy guy, so definitely keep me posted, man.
Yeah, thank you. And if you have paranormal questions, I'm very well versed in the paranormal side of things and how to do that stuff too. But the physical, I'm very good at too. So thank you for having me on.
Thank you for stopping by tonight for another episode of Midnight Lycanthropy here on Star Fox Radio. If you did enjoy this episode, please like, subscribe, and share it. Feed the algorithm. And until next time, stay safe.